this semester there was a change made to the final project that was in part just based on grader feedback, in terms of, as we looked at them, that there were some consistent issues that we made a change in the assignment for, and then in part just to make it a less daunting task for participants. It's a little bit of a smaller assignment. And so we've already had one question of people asking for a sample to look at, and we're kind of trying to figure out how we would do that given the change in the assignment. I'm not sure if it would be possible without us creating a new sample. So just so that you know, if that's a question that you have, whether there are any samples, that we don't have a sample because we because of the change in the structure of the assignment. Do you have any other comments about that, Heather?
Well, I would just add too, if you're feeling uncertain that you're on the right track, there's no problem with redoing an assignment. This isn't, you know, something where once you turn it in, it's over and done. So I'm more than willing to read things over and then, you know, send you an email saying, hey, I think that, you know, this part you were a little off on or whatnot. And a couple people last semester, we just worked back and forth with them a couple times even until they really understood what was being asked of them and got it right. And some of that was just time crunch on their part, trying to get it done in a short time frame, and also maybe just not quite understanding what was being asked. So don't feel like it's a one-shot or it's over.
Yeah, and I would also say that often the things that people would like a sample of are the types of things that you could send us a brief description and we can tell you if you're on the right track. And in some cases that's even more helpful for you to say this, you know, this is kind of the level of detail I was thinking of, is that on the right track, versus looking at something that was, especially things written for a different grade level. I'll tell you from reading them, the final projects, especially part 2 that we get, but even part 1, that are aimed at K through 2 look really different than the ones that are aimed at high school, especially people who are teaching upper level high school coursework. And so providing a sample for you that didn't match your grade level could make it even more confusing than just kind of giving you the opportunity to share your ideas and let us give you feedback. So, okay, I'm going to dive into the slides that I have here. So the first thing that I want to talk about is kind of and this, I should say that this time we're focused on part 1. If you have questions about part 2, we'll be glad to answer them, but our focus is on part 1, and that's one of the big changes. Actually, well, yeah, it is a change. That it used to be that part 1 was kind of due at a different point in the course. Part 1 and 2 have always been due separately, but we moved the deadline for when part 1 was due this semester. So we're taking this opportunity to really give you a space to ask questions about part 1. So the purpose of part 1 of the final project has 2 pieces to it, and this is written in the assignment sheet. The first is for you to demonstrate your understanding of one of the theories that we've covered. And you know, one of the things that actually we talked about in the class is how that process of writing about something is often when you're able to determine what you do and don't understand. And so this is really an opportunity for you to pick a theory that you think is interesting to you or you think applies to your classroom and kind of try your hand at explaining that theory on paper to really show yourself that you understand it and then to show that for credit. And then the second part is for you to really talk a little bit about how your ideas of how this theory applies to science teaching in general, which is a little bit different than just explaining that you understand the theory, that you then additionally understand how that applies specifically to science instruction. And that also, it's important to note that that's not that you're explaining why your lesson matches that theory. You're explaining that more generally, just as we learn about science, this theory applies. And I'll put the rubric up in a little bit, but one of the things that I do want to point out is that those 2 pieces are assessed separately. And so we have definitely seen part 1s that have come in before that do a great job explaining the theory and don't mention science at all. And we've seen ones that came in that talked all about science but didn't ever really touch on that broader understanding of what the theory is more generally. And yeah, so those are the 2 that, for me, that what I've seen as kind of 2 of the biggest things is just whether or not people are are addressing those two pieces, whether they're kind of addressed in separate paragraphs or they're, commingled into the same paragraph. If I finish reading it and I can't answer the question, do you understand the theory in general, that becomes an issue, or if you don't understand its application to science. Do you have anything that you would like to add to that, Heather?
No, I think you really hit it in terms of those sort of two prongs of it. Yeah, I really think you said it all.
Okay. So I'm going to open up to questions after I talk about what the four theories are, because I think that most often the questions that people have, it helps to know which theory we're talking about because they can be kind of different from each other. So the 4 weeks of theory that we went through were information processing, social cognitive theory, social constructivism, and situated cognition. And when you select a theory, you have to pick from one of those theories. You can't cover 2 of those. You have to pick just one, and that's in part due to just space. It would take a whole lot of paper and words to explain your understanding of more than one of those in one paper. Within each of those, there are topics, and you can focus on just one topic, or you can do multiple topics. I think pretty often we see people grouping zone of proximal development and instructional scaffolding together, or people grouping metacognition and the memory model together, but I've also seen people do just the 2-store memory model without talking about metacognition. And so the thing most often that people ask me about that they wanted to do is they'll say something like, I really wanted to talk about metacognition and instructional scaffolding, and that is not something that's allowed because that would mean really taking the time to kind of explain the basic understanding of 2 big theories, information processing and social constructivism, which you wouldn't have space for. So you can do more than one, they just have to be within the same category. So the question that I want to ask to kind of get those of you who are here today talking is, what are the theories that you might be leaning towards as you think about what you might be able to tie into a lesson or a unit for your class? So Lindy says not sure yet, and that's okay because it's not due tomorrow,
I would say, too, in response to Lindy's comment, maybe just thinking, even not committing to one that you want to do your paper on, but as we read through the theories in the last few weeks, was there one that really jived with you and you were like, yeah, I'm already doing this really well, or this is something that I think I model well in my classroom? So is there one that seems like a natural fit?
Heather, if you had to pick the one that you think you've seen most often, which of the theories do you think that we get the most papers on?
I would definitely say social constructivism.
Yeah,
I think last round, we had, 10 students in the class last round, or somewhere thereabouts, and I want to say there were 3 or 4 that were on inquiry, so not quite 50%, but quite a few felt that inquiry in its various levels was the most appropriate fit for science.
Mm-hmm. So Michelle is thinking of social cognitive theory with modeling, and I've got to say I've seen a few modelings, and I think often I see people do modeling who want to test out how well they can kind of articulate how that fits in. A lot of the modeling that we do is pretty informal, and so I've had a few papers come in where people challenge themselves to articulate kind of formally what modeling looks like.
My guess is, too, that might be particularly appropriate for Michelle because she's got the mixed age classroom, so you can also incorporate a lot of the peer modeling into whatever you're looking at doing.
Yeah, that would be great. The other one that there was a really interesting, I think it was upper elementary level. The first semester there was a communities of practice one that was really nicely done in terms of articulating how within this upper elementary environment students could become kind of peers in doing something together in this kind of collective process of learning, where they mapped out kind of what that would, an overview of what that would look like across the entire year, but then a specific exemplar of what it would look like for some content that was a teacher really specifically challenging themselves to add that into their classroom the next year. We've also, I don't remember last semester for sure, but we've gotten some information processing. Last semester, didn't we have representation from all four?
Yeah, I believe we did. Only one I can't quite recall is if there was situated cognition.
Yeah.
But I know the other three I can think of,
yeah.
papers and students.
So I think that there are two, from what I've seen, there are two ways to approach this, and one is exactly what Heather said, to say, as I was reading, this is the thing that I can kind of already identify that I'm doing, and if I can formalize that on paper, that can help me not just in practice, because I've formally articulated how I do this, but it can also help me in terms of my reviews with administration and all of those kind of formal processes that we go through to show that we're learning as teachers, that it helps me to have a piece of paper that I can articulate how I have research-based and theory-based instruction. So picking something you know you're already doing and articulating it is one way to attack this. The other way to attack it is to take the thing that seemed interesting to you, but you're not sure if you actually are doing it yet, and try to pick a lesson or a unit and integrate that into that lesson or unit as a challenge for yourself to add something new into your instruction. And both of those are completely valid approaches, depending on where you are in your teaching career. Does anybody have any questions about any of these theories, clarifications that you'd like us to make before you have to pick one? You do still have, I think, is it a week and a half or 2.5 weeks left to do this?
Yeah,
I think it's a week and a half.
Yeah, it's due Sunday the 12th or whatever, not this Sunday, but the next Sunday is. I think that's the 12th.
Yeah, so you still have a week and a half to think about it and pick one and write about it, but are there any questions you have about any of these topics or theories?
We got a lot of crickets today.
I know. Okay, well, I'm going to move to the next slide then. The length requirement for this half of the assignment is 1,000 to 1,500 words. And yes, we did, just as we talked about those topics, we really touched on how it ties into that unit that you're going to write for part 2. And in part 1, you're not writing your unit, you're not writing about your unit, you're just explaining the theory and how that theory ties into science instruction. And this length requirement, I don't know for sure, because I've never asked Heather. When you're grading, do you do a formal word check on every one?
No, though a couple that have seemed like excessively short, I've word checked and yes, discovered, oh, that's only 600 words.
Yeah.
You know, so if it's really short, I will kind of use the word check to find out, but usually I can just gauge by whether I feel like I've gotten a complete description for the two parts, you know, whether they've got enough words.
I've had the same experience when I'm looking at them. You know, when we initially picked the length, I was worried that it wouldn't be, you know, what if it's too little or too much? It's hard to, words are not a usual metric of measurement for me. And so we took some papers that we had as examples and looked at how many words they were and picked this. And I have found over the semesters that we've done this that it's a pretty good fit for how many words it takes to do a good job of this. If you're significantly below 1,000 words, you probably haven't included all the things. You probably haven't really described your theory or really described its specific application in science. And if you're getting above 1,500 words, you probably have way too much detail, or you should isolate down further. You might be trying to put in too many pieces. Maybe you're trying to cover all 3 parts that were talked about in social constructivism, and you need to pick one to remove. So if you're going above 1,500 words, you probably are doing more than we're looking for. You're going above and beyond. I just like Heather, I only do the word check if it seems off to me. And usually it's that it's too short. But I've had a couple come in that were way too long. And so I would caution you that if you're going above 1,500 words, you probably are putting more in than we're looking for.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I mean, and if you're a really concise writer and it comes in at 900 words, but you've really made your point and supported it, then, you know, we'll honor that as long as you've really proved and supported everything that you've said, then it's going to be okay.
And like Heather said, if it comes in under, let's say that you're in that situation and it's 900 and you're really worried, what if I think I've covered it and I haven't? It's totally fine to turn it in and to put a note on it that says, you know what, I don't know what else to say without saying things that aren't necessary, and it's a little bit short. Let me know if you want me to add to it. You're not going to have any kind of negative points taken off for having done that. I think we'd rather read the 900-word paper written really, really well than have you start adding stuff in just to fill out your words. So.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last thing is, or no, there's one more slide after this, but where do I learn about APA? So we have this paper as APA style because that's what education writing is done in, generally speaking. I give you 2 links on the assignment sheet for where you can go to learn more. And I just want to be really clear that when we say that this needs to be an APA style, we're really talking about the citations. I think that the first semester I had somebody turn in their paper and they had like put in all of the APA pieces, like the title page and the running head and the table of contents, and I mean it's not a full research paper. So as far as the fact that we want it to be APA, you know, the pieces that are relevant, if you can make sure that's an APA style, that's great. The pieces that aren't relevant, you can leave those out. Don't add extra parts to the paper. Just, I mean, there are some of those parts that are requested in the assignment, but if it's not requested in the assignment, you don't need to include it. And then also, I'll just say for those of you that don't do citations a lot, but maybe remember doing them in college, APA is the one where all you do is the last name and the year. So at the end of the sentence, wherever you've cited somebody's work, you just, in parentheses, put their last name and the year that they wrote their paper, and then you have a table or a reference list at the end that shows the references that you've made. And so it is a really simple citation style. Unless you're making a direct quote, you don't need to put the page number or anything on there. And somebody asked me about the citation for the Common Core, as if you're going to cite those, and I'll send that reference out to everybody, the appropriate citation for the Common Core standards that we've used in the class. So yeah, any questions about APA? Definitely. So this is the rubric that's used to evaluate this, and it's a pretty simple rubric. We're not going into the level of detail of breaking those 2 big goals apart at all. And so if you end up having questions about your grade and you wanted a breakdown of kind of why you lost points, we're usually more than willing to give that to you. And I think, in fact, Heather usually explains when she gives you your grade about what the points were taken off for. But of the 50 points that you're getting for this assignment, 20 of that is the description of the theory, 20 of that is the discussion of how it relates to science education, and then the last 10 is that you've done your citations in APA style and you've referenced everything. And the other thing I want to point out is that here, in the description of theory, one of the things that we're looking for is that you really are addressing how the theory helps us to understand how our students learn. And given the setup of this paper, it is appropriate to reference yourself in that or reference examples from your own teaching career. This is not a formal third-party, never referencing yourself type of paper. And then in how the theory relates to science education, I mean, it really specifically says to talk about how the theory complements or challenges your current teaching practice and how it's helpful to think about things you might change. So I know we've had one student that got really worried about not referencing themselves in it because it was this formal paper, but I want you to just recognize that we don't expect you to answer these bullets without referencing yourself. And that's all
Great.
I've got. Yes.
Well, Chris, I would just to make the last part like really clear, when it says appropriately use at least 2 sources from the course, the citations refers to the in-text citation of last name year, and then the references is the list that comes at the end where you let us know what the articles were that you cited in text. And you're welcome to use more than 2, and you can also bring in outside sources, but we're just looking for at least 2 from the course.
And actually, I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of the reasons why we've provided optional readings as you went along. So if you select a topic, you might want to go back and see if there were any optional readings that you chose not to read, because that gives you a little bit more breadth of appropriate articles to choose from.
And I also found when I did this assignment, when I took the course, I had a book on inquiry in science that I was able to pull from various chapters of. So it was an actual inquiry science sort of textbook for teachers, and there were just pieces of it that helped to explain the theory really well. And so I pulled from that too.
And actually, I'll just show you just for fun, since, you know, it's barely 5:30, and not that we can't end early, but for those who aren't familiar with Google Scholar, I highly recommend, if you are looking for additional writings to cite, you feel like what we've provided is great, but a lot of what you are wanting to say came out of what was in the videos, not what was in the readings, and so you're just looking for something else on that topic. So let's say that you are an elementary teacher. You could search in Google Scholar for inquiry in elementary science, and what you'll find is that it gives you a bunch of these. And on the right-hand side here, if you see this PDF, it will actually take you directly to the full PDF for that article. So if you're feeling like you don't really have enough information in what we gave you, this is a great tool to use. You can also see that down here at the bottom under Cite, if you click on that, it'll give you a correct APA citation. So you don't have to kind of look up and think about how to do that. And I fully admit that often when I am writing, even if I have a printout, like I'll have a printout in my office of an article I want to cite, I'll go and search for that article in Google Scholar to pull the APA citation, so I don't have to worry about whether I missed a comma or any of that. The other nice feature that's here is, let's say I have this dilemmas of teaching inquiry and elementary science methods, and I don't actually want to talk about the dilemmas, but maybe this is a good place to start. I can click on Cited By, and it'll give me every other article that's been published that cited that one. And so I might find, like this, factors affecting the implementation of argument in the elementary science classroom, a longitudinal case study. Maybe that perfectly fits what I wanted to do, and I'm able to potentially access a full view of that. Maybe not. It's pretty variable whether or not you can get access to them through Google Scholar, but it's there. So, and Lindy points out that the Montana State Library provides statewide access to the EBSCO databases for free, which is fantastic. And I find that using the EBSCO databases with the Google Scholar stuff, probably 50% of the time I'm able to get stuff through those. Sometimes I have to go through JARS or JSTOR because EBSCO doesn't have it. But between the links on the right-hand side and going through the state library through your school's login, you should be able to access some other things if you're interested. So hopefully that was helpful. And if not, it hopefully didn't hurt. Any other questions about part 1? Does anybody want to ask questions about part 2, as long as they're here? Okay, well, and I got nothing. I mean, that's everything I have. I'm excited to read these every, even though Heather is the one who does the first line of grading on them. I like to look through them and see all of the fantastic ideas that you guys come up with. Sometimes things that you're already doing and you're just explaining, and sometimes new things that you're going to try out. I love to see them. It's really exciting for me. So